Reality
therapist perception.
Bachelorette. This is Reactivity TV, which is a therapist perception of reality TV. So we're going to get right into it and talk all about what's been going on in the Bachelorette this week. Amy will have her portion. I'll get into mine, and we'll see what's happening. And there's a lot.
There's so much, and I know we've talked off mic, off camera, around the fact that there is so much to talk about that it feels like our little portion today doesn't nearly cover it. It also feels like so chaotic, which is, I know how we were feeling trying to even think about coming together for this portion. But before we get into it, I wanna note, and I think it's especially important for this week, that we are only commenting on what's portrayed on the show.
Of course.
We're not commenting on the cast members themselves. We don't know them.
Mm-hmm.
We're not assessing them.
And we're not giving any spoilers.
We're not giving any spoilers, and we don't want any spoilers. But the other thing I think is really important to think about for me as I'm going into my moment, is that I'm going to suspend all disbelief and try to live in this universe of the Bachelorette where you can hypothetically meet and fall in love and get engaged in 8 weeks. And so I'm like trying to see things through that framework.
Okay.
So I'm just throwing that out there.
Okay. It's important to frame it up like that.
The other thing I'm going to try really hard to do, because it will be difficult, is I'm going to try to remain unbiased about the cast members, because I was having a lot of judgments about what I was seeing.
Yeah, well, this is your therapist perception, which takes out your judgment, so it's perfect.
Yes, I will have to rein it in. But do you want to go first this week?
Okay, sure. So I kind of came out of the week with an overall theme and week, because it was 2 episodes this week. And my overall theme was difficult conversations. They're just nearing the end of the whole season, the whole journey. And that usually lends itself to a lot of difficult conversations. And we saw those over this past week. The first that I want to point out is the one between Tino and Rachel that was really delayed. And I found that very interesting because Rachel was clearly upset about what had happened at the hometown dates, and she really was itching to talk to Tino about it. And then they get to their date and they go horseback riding. They end up at this really beautiful little spot, post up for a while, and then on the asides, she was saying how she could not wait to tell him to talk more about this. And I found that so interesting that the conversation was delayed.
Right. Well, and he was saying too, like, I feel like something's wrong. She seems nervous. And it was this like elephant in the room for both of them.
Exactly. And I think it's very conducive of how a lot of people delay difficult conversations. I mean, they're called that for a reason. People have a hard time having them, and sometimes they do get put on the back burner. And so it was interesting to see it play out right in front of you, and to see how anxious she was to talk about it, and yet didn't want to bring it up yet, like was saving it for this perfect moment tonight, super sweaty on the date. Like that was the perfect moment. So I think there's a reality aspect to that. And then I also think that there's a part of that is like something to take away, just as far as what's keeping you from delaying a difficult conversation, and why are you saving it for a perfect moment, or why are you sitting on it for so long? If it's bothering you, what's keeping you from bringing it up?
Right. Well, I think that there's this idea or this belief that having a difficult conversation will spoil like
spoil the fun,
spoil the day, spoil like the goodness of your relationship. And so like the delay is really an avoidance, but
yes,
like the avoidance we know doesn't solve anything, and sometimes like makes things bigger and feel more uncomfortable. And so like while it's really appealing to do that, it just doesn't, it's not helpful.
yeah. I think another part I wanted to bring up about having difficult conversations is how Gabby handles difficult conversations. One of those instances was when she was talking to Jason, and she really wanted an answer from him. She really wanted him to say that he was here and that he's in love with her and that he's ready for everything. And when she wasn't getting that from him, she just got up and left the table, and pretty silently, quietly, not, telling him that she needs some space, or like telling him she needs a moment to gather herself. She was clearly upset, and reasonably so. And yet I just found that portion of the difficult conversation where she was clearly unhappy with how the conversation was going, that she just removed herself in that way. And then he had to come out and find her, to then talk it out, and in that moment sort of resolve things, and it looked like things were headed in a better direction for the two of them. But even in that instance too, just it was another way that a difficult conversation was being avoided.
Yes.
In a different way.
Yeah, right. Like Gabby was so uncomfortable with the way the outcome of the conversation was going or looking, that she removed herself rather than maybe sitting in it a little bit more, or even just being more transparent and saying, I'm having a really hard time with this information. It's taking me by surprise. Like, can I take a minute? She didn't do any of that. I think it was implied, but it was such a charged emotional conversation. I can't imagine what it must have felt like to be Jason and to have this person that you really care about just kind of get up and leave in the middle of what's a conversation about your future.
Right. Exactly.
I did really appreciate that Jason did go and,
yes,
and find her and comfort her, ask her if she was okay. I thought that was quite nice, quite emotional and mature.
Yes. Yeah. And it brought the difficult conversation to another level, which is really indicative in a lot of relationships. If that comfort is available and that comfort is delivered upon, then a lot of work can be done, and a lot of difficult conversations can become a lot easier when that comfort level is there. And sometimes that comfort level is missing for a lot of people. And I think that's where there's further delay, and then there's further buildup, and it just becomes this eruption at some point.
Yes, for sure. Oh, yeah, that was a lot. There were a lot of difficult conversations, but one thing, this isn't my moment that I wanted to talk about, but one thing that I really wanted to comment on though was thinking about Eric and Gabby's I guess not conversation, but the series of their interactions. And I appreciated watching how they navigated through that together as a couple, because couples do have difficult conversations and they might not always see eye to eye, and there might be misunderstandings. That's just part of putting two humans together.
Yeah.
And so I did really appreciate them finding their way through a difficult conversation in a really productive way.
And whether or not that was one of those times when it may have been nudged from producers or something, because it sounded like they had this conversation prior to that and she was taken aback by him bringing it up again. Whether or not that was the reason it got brought up again, or it was because there was still something unresolved, which happens more frequently than people would think. So there could have been an initial confusion on the viewer part, and of course on Gabby's part, to think like, oh, I thought we moved through this. Clearly we haven't. And that actually happens a lot. So definitely. Yeah. Kudos to them and getting through that conversation and then circling back again to he's the only one.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I guess in thinking about Eric and Gabby and just all of these interactions throughout the week, the 2 episodes, I was all over the place with my reactions.
Yeah.
There was a lot that I was reacting to and observing, but one of the things that really stuck out to me was the concept or the visible view of both vulnerability and authenticity. What this show, like, he always talks about is being vulnerable.
Yes.
I want someone to be vulnerable, but I don't really think they know what that means.
Yeah.
Because it seems like what they are expecting when they say to be vulnerable or to be authentic is to tell some sad story. And that can be one way that you're vulnerable, but to be vulnerable means to be authentic and to be real and to be genuine, even if that might not have the most positive outcome or might end up with you being not liked or have someone have maybe an opinion about you that isn't positive. And so what I appreciated kind of watching was the contrast between the ways in which the authenticity and the vulnerability showed up in Gabby's conversations with the men that she was dating, and the way in which it showed up with Rachel and the men that she was dating. And I guess the thing that I'm responding most to was just how much deeper the relationships that Gabby has built with those men are compared to the relationships that Rachel has built with the men that she has on her side of the camp, and how surface level so many of those interactions really feel. You know, Tino's parents asked her a couple weeks ago, what do you like about him? What do you know about him? He gives blood. Like, that's great. That is a quality, but have you really had any deep, authentic, vulnerable conversations that lead you to the decision of, this is someone I want as my partner for life?
Yeah.
And so that was really present with me as I was kind of watching the show, was the contrast of the depth of the relationships. And I think a lot of the base was in the ability to be authentic. Gabby is 100% herself every week. She's goofy, she's quote unquote rough around the edges. You can take, people love her, people aren't a fan. She doesn't seem to care, which I appreciate. Whereas Rachel seems to be a little bit more performative at times and says what I think my perception is that she says things that she thinks people, aka us viewers, might want to hear or want to see. And I think as someone who is likes the verbal affirmation, I think she really seeks that. And again, it's not always clear if she is connecting to the person or connecting to what they're telling her, like someone because she really likes them or likes them because of the way they make her feel.
It's a great point.
I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent here, but I guess the other authenticity was a word used in this episode, and it was used by Zach. And Zach
inauthentic.
Oh, sorry. Yes, that she was not authentic. She was inauthentic.
Right.
And that really struck me. I said this when we talked reactivity TV in the past. Rachel wears her emotions on her sleeve. You know exactly how she's feeling. And it was very clear after her date with Zach that she was not in it. Like, her body language, she can't fake it. And yet her words didn't match what her body language was doing. And Zach clearly felt the inauthenticity in that interaction. It totally made him doubt everything, and understandably. And the thing that really upset me
Mhm.
as I'm just going to keep going,
Yeah.
is that, Zach, we don't know from Rachel's end, but what we know, as Zach has told Jesse and us, that Rachel said that he's not ready for marriage because of his age, and that's the reason that they can't move forward. And I found that to be so mean, quite frankly, because that's not honest.
Mhm.
It's not honest at all. And I think the real answer is, I'm not into you. And that's harder to say. And rather, she's blaming Zach for something he has no control over and really has no bearing. Age doesn't mean readiness to get married or not.
Mhm.
And now it has Zach thinking that there's something wrong with him when it's really just, you're not the match, and that's okay.
Mhm.
And that really bothered me too. Rachel wanting to come away being liked,
Yeah.
and being like in good graces,
Right. Which to me seemed like her trying to put it on him,
Mhm.
trying to make
him
the problem, him the reason, instead of, yes, right, instead of her saying, I don't like you, this isn't going to work, I'm not into you. She was trying to turn it around and say that there's something coming from him, which really just, it is inauthentic. You're not sharing, you're not being vulnerable with what you need and what you want. And yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah. So that, I mean, clearly I have a lot of thoughts about it, but that part really it really irked me a lot, and just again felt unfair. But I think in dating and in relationships, this happens a lot, that um, that we're not really honest with people about how we're feeling because we don't want to be the bad guy.
Mhm.
And we end up being the bad guy because our like desire to be liked, like really can be hurtful to someone.
Well, and I think that's where my big takeaway, difficult conversations, and yours, authenticity, really they they overlap, because you can't have difficult conversations unless you're being authentic. You can't be vulnerable. I mean, you can't have difficult conversations unless you're going to be vulnerable. And she was avoiding a bigger, more difficult conversation by saying what she truly wants and saying it's your age.
Yes, yes, very well tied together. Okay, well, I imagine the next 2 weeks, because it's 2 weeks of a finale, we'll have a lot more to react to.
Oh yeah. I mean, we got heated talking about this before, so there's a lot of reactivity happening over here.
Yes, more to come.
Yes.